Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke. And on this episode, I'm joined once again by Dr. Jonathan Howard, who is a neurologist and psychiatrist who practices at New York University, Bellevue. Dr. Howard was on the front lines of the fight against COVID and has written several books on the misstatements and falsehoods that were pushed by doctors during and after the pandemic. His latest book is called Everyone Else is Lying to You, and it's a staggering list of people being flat out wrong with receipts. I'm really glad to have the chance to talk with him again today. Stick around.
This isn't the working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day bigger your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin.
Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire grinding system. Nobody can. But together, everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
Dr. Howard, thanks for joining me. Welcome back to Did Nothing Wrong.
Happy to be here again. Thanks for having me, Griff. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I mean, just, keeping on in the face of the crazy that's going on right now. And, we had you on probably 2 years ago now to talk about the people who found fame and clout and made a whole shitload of money during the height of the pandemic by pushing policies designed to put corporate profits ahead of people's lives. And I like that you've done so much work and research to document this. And it was a very hopeful thing that someday when the world was less crazy, we might be able to sit down, kind of take a reckoning of all this and point out the people who got it so spectacularly wrong on purpose. But unfortunately, they seem to have done their job a little too well. So now we're in the bad future where RFK Jr. is Health and Human Services Secretary. And quite a few of these people have found themselves in roles well beyond their capability as a reward for being on side when they were needed and, pushing the company line, literally. So this is where we are in the year 2025. And you've got a new book about this. It's brilliant. Everyone Else is Lying to You. So who else specifically is the everyone else that your book is focusing on? And what's the primary lie that they were promoting?
So first of all, the book discusses all of the doctors who helped elevate Kennedy to power and themselves in the process. So this includes the head of the NIH, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the head of the FDA, Dr. Marty Makary, the sort of right-hand man, Dr. Vinay Prasad, the head of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, Dr. Martin Kulldorff. So all of these doctors were pro-Kennedy doctors. They helped elevate him into power. And they did this by saying, we are the only ones who are telling you the truth about COVID.
Right.
And the truth that they were telling, or the truth in quotes, is that COVID is just a mild cold for everyone under age 70, and that one infection leads to permanent immunity. So they were really, very masterful propagandists, and they deluged our COVID landscape with misinformation. And here we are today where they're screwing things up royally.
So scientific disagreements happen. And it sounds like just these people were able to weaponize the concept of doubt and make that something that you could use to put just enough distance between the right thing and what they were saying to be able to just muddy the waters a bit. So how do you tell the difference between what might be more of a legitimate debate question and somebody like an RFK Jr. who's simply trying to ask questions and muddy the waters?
Yeah, it can be a hard thing to answer, and I don't know the exact right answer to that question, how you tell if someone's coming from a place of good faith or not. I want to make it clear that the people who I discuss in my book, it wasn't just people who had good faith policy disagreements.
Right.
I mean, these people botched basic facts over and over again. Probably the best example is they claimed that the flu killed more children than COVID. And they made these claims at a point where COVID had killed about 1,000 children and the flu had killed 10 or 15. So it wasn't just questions of good faith disagreement. They treated vaccine side effects as a fate worse than death.
Right.
And they claimed that the mass infection of unvaccinated people under age 60 would end the pandemic in 3 to 6 months. And that's what we talked about last time I
Right.
was here. Things didn't work out that way.
No, no. I mean, the one that always blew me away was their insistence that we would have immunity after one infection. It's like, number one, how do you know that? Number two, that's not what happened with SARS in Hong Kong with the brief results of the study they did on that. Why are you so sure about this? That was the part I could never get my head around, is that they somehow knew, even though that research really hadn't been done. And this was this whole completely new thing. Yet they were so sure this is how it would work. It's you're making a huge bet with society on this. And like their narratives evolved throughout the pandemic. It felt like they went from that, the whole we should, have herd immunity, we should open everything up, to where they ended up by the end of it, that we had completely overreacted to all of this stuff. Can you kind of walk me through what that was like to watch these people kind of shamelessly evolve on this subject?
Yeah, so 2020 for these guys was all about herd immunity via natural immunity. And you're absolutely right that they treated COVID, this brand new virus, as an old familiar friend,
Right.
starting in the spring of 2020. So you can find tweets from the current head of the head of the ACIP, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, in April 2020, saying that Sweden was close to herd immunity. Or Jay Bhattacharya, the head of the
Right.
NIH.
I remember that. And it didn't seem to have anything behind it. It just seemed to be like, oh, okay, we're just kind of saying this. Nobody seemed to really know what was going on at that point, but okay.
Yeah.
However you're looking at this.
It was a lot of wishful thinking. I think they thought if we say it, it will be true. The power of positive thinking.
Wow.
But Jay Bhattacharya claimed that New York and Sweden also had herd immunity in July 2020. And they have done a masterful job of rewriting the history of the pandemic to do several things: to minimize what happened when the virus spread out of control. So the horrific scenes here in my hospital where I'm at right now, Bellevue Hospital, in the spring of 2020, just the mass death,
Right.
the giant refrigerated trucks, that sort of stuff is like Lord Voldemort to them. And I should say the giant refrigerated
Right.
trucks to store the corpses.
And we all
they'll
saw
never-
that. We all saw that footage. Everyone saw, either up close or in person. I mean, I was going to Kirkland, Washington every day when that outbreak hit, and we knew nothing. It was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, maybe we're all done. It was terrifying, like the first big outbreak, and you're going there every day. Great. This is awesome. Having a great time. So honestly, you talk about this a little bit, and I want to get some specifics here. You're talking about they made these predictions that ended up being just complete garbage. And you can very easily look back and say, nope, you were wrong here. Look at this, look at this, look at this. And it leads into something that I've always kind of wondered about, not just about here, but why do so many people keep trusting and believing people who are this wrong and it's this documentable? I really, they have this track record of inaccuracy, yet somehow they get to keep coming back. Why is this?
Yeah, that's a huge mystery. I mean, why did so many people forgive Trump for COVID, for example? I think one thing that they have done a good job of is sort of, again, rewriting the history of the pandemic. If you listen to them talk about their philosophy now, they will not talk about herd immunity. They will not talk about natural immunity,
Oh,
even
yeah.
though, again, that dominated the conversation in 2020. They'll cherry pick the parts of the pandemic, the mitigation measures that were the most unpopular, and say, oh, we only cared about that. We only cared about masking toddlers and disrupting children for poor and disadvantaged children and closing churches. So they'll talk about it that way. And when they speak about it this way. Oh,
Right.
we just wanted things open. We just wanted, education and this sort of thing. I mean, it sounds like this pretty unobjectionable sort of thing. When in fact, if you actually read, especially the Great Barrington Declaration, if you actually go read
Hmm.
it, it's all about herd immunity
Yep.
via natural immunity.
Right. And it just seemed so premature to make some of these calls on the part of all of these people, yet they were all lined up and willing to, sign off on this. I mean, what's the payoff for these people that's worth potentially setting your scientific credibility on fire for?
Well, look where they are now,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they have achieved fame, they have achieved power. For many years, they received all these sort of accolades. They made it seem as if only they were in charge. COVID would have been over in a matter of months. We would have saved lives. Society never would have had to close down. It would have been perfect. So they elevated themselves to power based on accomplishments that were incredible, amazing, and wonderful, but also completely imaginary. They didn't protect the vulnerable. They didn't open schools. They sent
Right.
out tweets and went on podcasts
Mhm.
instructing other people to do those sort of things. And now that they have power and the opportunity to prove themselves, they aren't stopping measles. They aren't
Nope.
stopping pertussis. So they are failing to do any of the things that they claim they would have done or that they called for their predecessors to do. So they became famous based on these hypothetical accomplishments. And it seems to me a lot of them continue to try to want to relive 2020. The current head of the NIH spends most of his time, as best I can tell, talking about lockdowns that ended 4 or 5 years ago. It was the highlight of his life.
Yeah, it just some people never get past high school. Some people evidently are never going to get past lockdowns, and he seems like one of these guys. You've got a great one where you say in the book some of these guys are defense attorneys for the virus. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit on that one?
Yeah, so they spoke in one way about mitigation measures. They spoke about them as this utter catastrophe. They said lockdowns were the worst assault on the working
Right.
class and the poor since Vietnam and segregation. These catastrophic events.
That's a great
When
line.
it came to the virus, they wrote articles such as Dr. Marty McCary. He wrote articles called The Power of Natural Immunity, where he claimed essentially that one COVID infection led to lifelong immunity. Or Dr. Martin Kulldorff wrote articles called The Triumph of Natural Immunity. And they were very, very upset that public health officials didn't join them in just glorifying natural immunity
Oh
like it
yes.
was this wonderful thing that led to permanent, robust immunity, when in fact, the power of natural immunity is that it killed 1.2 million Americans and injured millions more.
Yes.
So they're right that it was powerful, but not in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that I've kind of thought about a little bit, and we'll kind of get to it about why things might be a little harder to deal with now. Nobody seems to remember the, 1.4, wasn't it, million people that died in the initial waves of this thing. And yeah, you talk about this in the foreword of the book. There's a part about how low wage workers became and are now essential workers, right? Walker's foreword, he talks about this. And I thought about that and I was kind of like, how much of the current, to borrow a word from another guest on the show, in shitification was caused by the fact that we lost 1.3 million people, good chunk of them out of the workforce. And then there's still untold millions that are still dealing with long COVID and haven't been able to return to work. How much of what we're currently seeing is just the result of taking that many people out of society and having to scramble to
Boy,
kind of replace it?
that's a good question. I don't know exactly how to answer that. What if 1.2 million Americans could suddenly come back to life? I mean, the COVID was obviously more dangerous
Yeah.
for older people, probably less likely to be in the workforce. But here in our hospital, we lost several doctors and several nurses, and we struggled to replace them for a
Hmm.
while. In our neurology department, we dear friend of mine, died of COVID
Right.
here at Bellevue.
Right. And nobody
Um,
has been able to I mean, you take that many people out of any industry, and it was predominantly, I think, a lot of more working class and people who are on the front lines, people, doctors like yourselves. And that's not knowledge that gets replaced very easily when it is lost. It's very hard to staff those kinds of things up again. So things are slower now. It takes longer to get certain things done. You know,
Yeah.
it's
And
not.
it's also worthwhile to think about the counterfactual. Like, what if we had done nothing? What if we had
Yeah.
made no effort to slow the virus? If you were to listen to the doctors who I write about, they make it seem like it's this pandemic paradise where everything could have been open, and vulnerable people could have been protected. Everything would have been just fine, which is of course absurd.
Yes.
And they blame every negative aspect of the pandemic on people, not the virus. So they claim that it was dumb administrators who closed schools, or incompetent politicians that closed businesses, rather than the virus itself. So
Right.
what it really was an attack on people who had real world responsibility, unlike them. Although if you examine their track record in places where they did have influence, like Florida under Ron
Oh,
DeSantis
yes.
during the Delta wave, what happened? Schools closed, old people died, young people died, teachers died. So they didn't do a single thing that they claimed they would have done, or that they proposed, or that they argued for. And then again, now that they have power, they can't even run a single meeting without embarrassing themselves. Martin Kulldorff at the ACIP, during their one and only meeting, was forced to say, "We are rookies," to explain all of the mistakes and embarrassing things that happened during the meeting. And they have indefinitely postponed all future meetings.
Wow.
Meanwhile, he is still claiming essentially that if only people listened to him, things would have been better. He portrays himself as some sort of pandemic superhero who could have bent the virus to his will. And what's astonishing is a lot of people believed him. A lot of people said he got COVID right because he proposed things and he argued for things, not because he did things. So, I could have proposed a solution to COVID, and that would have been that we never let the virus in the country to begin with. Wouldn't that have been better?
Oh, yeah.
No one would.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Yeah.
That
So
always
that's
works.
my proposal.
Absolutely always works. Totally works. It's a great.
What could go wrong?
Viruses will see that and turn around, go back where they came. Just,
No
oops,
viruses allowed, son.
don't want to mess with that. Nope. Viruses that are famously not spreadable. It's just that worked maybe once, and I think it was the first SARS outbreak, as far as I know. You really have to get on this in the United States. No, that just isn't going to work at all, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
good thought. So, like, how does that misinterpretation of like the initial data, the way they kind of sold it, like the early estimates of the fatality rate, how does that get amplified and stuck? Like, it's like people can't get past it when they hear that initial, projection. Or I still have people sometimes say to me about things that were claimed in the very early stages of this thing that didn't end up being true, but they're still convinced they were. How do you get past that? Get people to check out maybe the updated, I guess the updated facts as they are. How do you get that out of the public consciousness once it's there?
Well, it can be very hard because these doctors were very good at spreading doubt and
Right.
mistrust. And that's really what the second book is about. So, for example, when you said 1.2 or 1.4 million Americans died, there were doctors who were out there spreading doubt about that death toll as early as April 2020, claiming that it was, people were dying with COVID, not of COVID, that death certificates couldn't be trusted, that it was doctors who were killing patients through premature intubations. I mean, these crazy sort of internet myths were all started by prestigious doctors, mostly in the Bay Area, Stanford and UCSF. And I should say that none of them basically none of them treated COVID patients. And that matters, right? The fact
Yeah.
that I worked in a hospital throughout the pandemic doesn't mean that I was right about everything, but it does mean that I saw what the virus could do with my own eyes.
Yeah.
And these guys constantly said things that no one who worked on a COVID unit would say. Like, it wasn't a great mystery in April 2020 when 50 people were dying at my hospital every single day, what was killing them. But if you
Yeah.
listen to John Ioannidis, a famous epidemiologist and scientist at Stanford, we were too stupid to know what was killing our patients. And it was just old people who were dying of normal, everyday old people things, according to him. Or we were to blame because we were intubating patients too soon.
Right.
So,
Right.
so it can be very hard to change people's minds about this sort of thing.
Yeah. And we see that a lot. The one thing people don't seem to understand about science is that it does evolve. And when it evolves, this isn't inconsistent. It's that we learn something that possibly changes what we thought we knew. But people have a really hard time getting past that initial prediction. And they say, like, well, they said it was going to be this. And I'm like, yeah. And then a whole bunch of new evidence came in and they revised their models and changed a few things because that's what you do. But it's so hard to get past that with people. And it's everywhere, and not just, science, but politics, et cetera. Once that initial perception gets out there, it's just, man, I would love
And
to
some of
find
the
that.
Some of the predictions were actually pretty good. One of the most early predictions, I think, was by this guy, Neil Ferguson. I might be
Okay.
mispronouncing his first name, doesn't matter, out of London. And he predicted that if the United States did nothing, like no one did anything to stop COVID, like we didn't even know about germ theory,
Right.
that something like 2.4 million Americans would have died. That seems very reasonable in retrospect.
Uh,
Uh, that wasn't entirely off base. And I think, there were maybe a few people who overestimated COVID, although it's a little bit hard to think of who that might have been. But the harms are asymmetric, right?
yeah.
Someone who overestimated, let's say we had overestimated COVID and we locked down for no reason.
Right.
That wouldn't have been good. False alarms are never a good thing. But it's would have been much better than underreacting.
Right.
Approximately 200,000 people died in the United States because they refused a vaccine. That's as many people as we lost in World War I. It was the greatest mass suicide event in in the world.
Yeah, unfortunately,
History to
yes,
come.
it's about how it worked out. And you still see the effects, every day. So let's talk a little more about some of the people that used, their credentials to basically prop this thing up in directions that it shouldn't have gone, prop up some really bad ideas. And one of the things that they tended to use was institutional affiliation. And how did that add to the problem with these guys?
Well, so all of these doctors came from prominent institutions. I already mentioned Stanford and
Stanford and-
UCSF.
Right.
But also Johns Hopkins and Harvard, one person at my medical school here as well. And for the most part, they mixed good advice with bad advice, meaning they correctly said that COVID was devastating for elderly people or people with underlying conditions or in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. So they said very reasonable things, while essentially saying that COVID was harmless for everyone else and that we could, seal off the vulnerable people in a bubble. And they were very good at presenting these ideas. If I woke up from a coma right now and saw some of their videos and saw their Stanford and Harvard affiliations, I would think that they were very reasonable. As a matter of fact, I did think they were very reasonable. I remember hearing, again, John Ioannidis in May and April 2020, essentially saying the worst is over, we're past the peak. And I remember telling my wife, this world famous scientist thinks that COVID may be closer to over than the beginning. But their universities propped them up. They did a masterful job of weaponizing any sort of pushback as saying, I'm being censored, I'm being silenced. So just go to YouTube and type in Jay Bhattacharya censorship, and you'll find 20 videos about how censored he is. As a matter of fact, in the spring of 2024, he spoke at RFK presidential rally back when RFK was running for president.
But he's
And he
canceled.
spoke in front of a microphone, in front of a crowd of several thousand people, saying how he had been silenced. And now that he is in charge, he is purging people and firing people.
Mhm.
You know, anyone who dissents gets loses their job. But there were several academic conferences at these institutions. Probably the most infamous one was a year ago at Stanford in 2024, where the president of Stanford spoke and gave this introduction to this conference. It was just a complete revisionist history conference
Right.
with Jay Bhattacharya, Scott Atlas, Vinay Prasad, Dr. Marty McCary, and a bunch of other people who all went on to power and are now trying to defund all of these universities. And they really did it by saying, we are just thinking differently. You mentioned scientific debate. That's all we want is just debate and discussion. They never would have invited someone like myself there because they know that all I would have done had they given me 30 minutes to speak is just show videos of what they said from 2020. That's all I would have done. And that was enough to make them want to have nothing to do with me. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. They don't really like they don't really like being reminded of the things that they said that are just not how it all came down and how it worked. And what are the prospects of, because it seems like one of the most damaging long-term effects that this all had was the fact that it gave them the cover to dismantle these institutions. Like, if you'd told somebody during Trump's first term that he's going to dismantle the NIH and the CDC and turn them into functional shells, nobody would have believed you. That sounded too insane. Even for anybody who thought he was the worst, you'd be like, you wouldn't do that. That would be about the dumbest thing you could do. And yet, after all of this, they have somehow sowed enough doubt in the public's mind that the public will put up with this. And I don't think there's a prison, deep enough, I guess, to put people in that resulted in this, because it's going to be years before we can put these institutions back together, if at all. This is not an overnight thing. We're going to lose like a generation of kids to science here. This.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. We're committing scientific suicide.
Yeah.
And the second book, the publication of it got delayed by about 4 or 5 months, which turned out to be a giant blessing in disguise, in that the first chapter of the book is all about the first 4 months or so of the Kennedy reign of terror. And you're exactly right that everything that they stoked anger and rage, doubt about COVID, and they're using that as a pretext to gut the CDC, to gut the FDA and the NIH, because they convinced much of the American public that these people had it coming, that everything that the virus did was in fact the fault of these people. And they made mistakes. I'm not here to defend absolutely everything that they did by any stretch of the imagination. Parks never had to be closed. Surfers never should have gotten tickets.
Yeah.
But it wasn't these sort of, these people were making these decisions in a very short amount of time as this horrible new virus spread silently amongst us.
Mm-hmm.
We witnessed what was happening in Italy and Spain. So I want to give them some grace because they were making these tough decisions in real time.
Right. And we witnessed what we saw in China with them actually welding apartment buildings shut with people inside them. They're taking it that seriously. Maybe we oughta.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, you can say what you want about how they're going to have herd immunity, but these people don't believe that. And the mass graves in Italy that we're seeing don't look like there's herd immunity going on here. And
right. And so they portrayed public health officials as basically acting like public health officials in China. So Vinay Prasad, for example, wrote
Right.
an infamous essay likening mitigation measures to Nazi Germany. Jay Bhattacharya starred in these propaganda videos where he was talking about a biomedical security state with footage of troops in the streets. And everything that they warned about
Wow.
is happening now
Mhm.
under the Trump administration, in which they proudly serve. So all of these doctors are overtly, they have to be, obviously, pro-Trump
Oh,
and
yeah.
pro-Kennedy. And so, in my opinion, they own everything that the Trump administration is doing right now, from blowing up boats, in Venezuela, to arresting grandmas on the street in Chicago and Los Angeles.
Yeah.
They may think that they have no part of that. I'm just part of the FDA, but they
Uh,
don't get to decide how we judge them. We
yeah.
do.
Yeah. And this was a huge part of what set up what's happening now. And that's the part that I think they at some point need to answer for academically, legally, however we want to do that, to say, no, there was a time when science needed to be defended. There was a time when this really needed to step up, and you used your credentials from Stanford or your credentials from UCSF to convince people that science was bad, essentially. You need to not ever be trusted again. You
And
can't.
what's scary is they did that under the guise of just being neutral scientists,
Right.
right? If you listen to what they say, they would say exactly what I and probably every other doctor and scientist would say. I just follow the data. I'm just trying
Right.
to be objective. But they were overtly political actors who routinely said, "Don't trust the CDC, don't trust the NIH, don't trust the FDA." They blame them for unleashing the whole virus. So the lab leaks served a very useful function for them
Right.
because they were able to say the people who are telling you to avoid the virus are responsible for the whole thing in the first place. And I don't think they're happy right now. I'm not a mind reader. I think their lives were much better when they were just doing what I'm doing now, making podcasts about how we need to end the lockdowns
Yeah.
and this sort of thing, and calling for other people to do things, and being on Fox
Right.
News and getting platformed in the Wall Street Journal and this sort of thing. What I'm doing right now is very easy. And now that they have real jobs to do, they seem to be miserable. They're flailing. They're getting in fights and arguments. Their staff revolts. Their staff is mocking them. If you go to
Oh,
NIH on
yes.
Reddit, they
Oh,
call Jay
yes.
Bhattacharya Podcast Jay. So I think
Ouch.
they're very unhappy right now.
Hmm.
And I honestly don't think that they wanted to go down as the architects of destruction of American science. I don't think that was their goal. But again, they don't have a choice in the matter. That's what they did, and that's how we're going to judge them.
You know, let's just do some hypothetical here. Just work with me here. Say somebody sane gets elected in 2028 and they call you and offer you a position running a new department that combats medical disinformation. What kind of safeguards would you put into place to prevent a similar, kind of erosion of trust and just what we see with the dissemination of bad information like this in crisis situations?
I'd have to think about whether I would accept that job because I'm always a little bit wary of handing power to government because I know that the good
Fair.
guys might not always be
Fair.
in power. Having said that, I think really what needs to happen is that we need, my profession, doctors and scientists, need to learn that there is value in speaking out. Previously, it was kind of seen as this niche thing, like not good or not bad. Like if I told you, man, I'm a huge stamp collector, right? Like, okay, fine, cool, but it's not, and not that I'm looking for sort of personal accolades and pat on the backs and this sort of thing, but my profession, I think, was braver 5 years ago running into the room of COVID patients than it was calling out misinformation. there's this sense that it's rude, it's impolite, and we need to allow people to think differently, which we absolutely do. I mean,
Sure, sure.
academic freedom protected those doctors, but it also protects me. It's the reason that I can say, within reason, kind of whatever I want without the fear of my university cracking down on me.
Right.
So all that stuff is very important. But I think we need to do a better job of not silencing bad actors, not censoring them, but treating them like pariahs. So I've been studying the anti-vaccine movement for 15 years. And before the pandemic, anti-vaccine doctors were rightly, outcasts. They were like arsonist firefighters. And that's how we need to treat these people. And I think that's ultimately going to be their fate. It will be interesting to see what happens in 3 or 4 years when they leave their current positions. I guess they'll just go to right-wing think tanks. But actually, we're already seeing that because large parts of the country are seceding essentially from the federal public health apparatus, forming their own public health collectives, or the American Academy of Pediatrics or the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology is forming their own independent public health and vaccine guidance, marginalizing our current medical establishment. So these guys, their fate is already kind of being revealed, and that they're going to be these irrelevant people who have titles and official power, but they're just going to be ignored, which is entirely appropriate. That is a perfect fate for them. Irrelevancy.
Yeah, irrelevance, because the states aren't waiting around for this. I mean, I'm lucky I live in Washington State, which is really one of the, we're going to fix this one way or another. Either you're in on it or you're not. And if you're not, we're going to partner with Oregon and California and everybody else out here and, pool our resources, pool our data. And it seems like if you wanted to set up sort of a shadow CDC, you could staff it up pretty easily at this point. Say you were running one of those health associations and you needed to do some forecasting. You needed to, crunch some big data. Man, there's a whole lot of scientists that would love to have the job right now.
And that's kind of happening. The New England Journal of Medicine is partnering with the University of Minnesota to replace the CDC's lost publications, the MMWR. Again, the University of Minnesota has started something called the Vaccine Integrity Project. They're very clear, we're not here to replace the CDC, but wink, wink, they kind of are.
Well, they aren't around and you are. So, I mean, let's,
And they just published a review in the New England Journal of something like 511 studies on the flu, COVID, and RSV vaccines. And it essentially said the purpose of this paper, the reason we're doing this is that you can't trust the federal government anymore to provide this information. I've never read anything like that before.
And you can't disagree with it either. That's the problem. I mean, that's pretty correct at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, it's every
other
other
I also
field.
think these doctors are also going to have a hard time. They're going to get criticism, not just from reasonable doctors like myself, but the cranks and quacks are going to be coming after them very soon too, unless they go after the MMR vaccine, the HPV vaccine, this sort of thing. And they know those vaccines have value. There's no question about it. And I don't think they want to go down in history as the people who helped make Andrew Wakefield's dreams come true, but they're poised to do that.
Yeah,
I'm afraid. And they're going to have to make some really tough decisions about whether they want to keep their jobs and titles and go down again in history as the people who decimated Americans' vaccines, or whether they're going to resign and protest, although nothing they've ever done in the history of their careers makes me think they'll take a bold stand that way.
not holding my breath, unfortunately.
No.
So for the average person that's trying to be well-informed, especially in an age like this, where there's so much misinformation, what's one practical piece of advice you can offer for distinguishing between like credible scientific information and persuasive sounding disinformation?
Yeah, so it can be very hard. I have a very hard time with it myself in fields of medicine that I don't know well, to say nothing of the rest of the world. I mean, I read about some events overseas sometimes, who bombed who, and I have no idea what to believe. right? And that's the goal of these people, to make us confused and to make us unsure who to believe. I think a few rules of thumb are pick people who speak on very narrow topics. So
Right.
there's a bunch of things that I haven't discussed, and I don't talk about a lot. I mean, masks, ventilation, testing, whether, not because I don't think, or to say nothing of non-communicable diseases, abortion or drug care, or this sort of,
Right.
this
Right.
sort of,
Nobody
just
can
because
know
I'm not
everything. It just
right. But people who are unreliable, for example, the doctors I talked about, discussed every aspect of the pandemic. You name it:
yeah.
masks, vaccines, testing, education, children's mental health,
People don't realize these
social.
are all very different disciplines and very different fields that
Yeah.
need completely different fields of study and areas of knowledge. So, yeah, they can get away with it for people who aren't.
And I think the second thing is that people who admit error. So Dr. Paul Offit, famous vaccine scientist, underestimated COVID in March 2020, claiming that the flu was going to be worse. Within a month or so, I mean, after it became obvious, after there were bodies in the streets here in New York City, it became obvious that he was wrong. He said, if you're going to be wrong, you might as well make an ass of yourself in front of a million people. But that stands in contrast to all the doctors I wrote about who also predicted that COVID was going to kill 10, 20, 30, 40,000 Americans. And as the death toll blasted through that, sometimes within a week of them making these predictions, they just kept going and saying the same thing, that the only thing we have to fear are mitigation measures. Any effort to contain COVID is worse than COVID itself, which they said very
Oh, yes.
explicitly. But
Oh, yes. I
I'm not putting
remember.
words in their mouth. I'm not putting words in their mouth.
Nope. It's all there. And hopefully things like your book exist long enough that we get to the point where maybe we do actually take an accurate accounting of all of this. That's what I'm really hoping for, is that someday these people are going to have to answer that question. Irrelevance would work too. But man, it would be fun to see them actually debate somebody who really didn't have any interest in making them look good to some extent. So,
No, they're very good at hiding out in their safe spaces. So,
oh yeah,
Vinay Prasad, for example, gave a recent interview to Barry Weiss, and that's the only kind of person that he will talk to.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. They know that the whole point of all of this is generating content to a large extent. They're not going with anything that could even be remotely negative when it comes to any publicity they're getting at this point. They're not going to risk it. There are certain people that they'll never talk to. You're right. It's all across the board with this. They just aren't going to have that conversation because it will not go well for them, and it won't result in any content they can actually, pop with. So,
Correct. And the whole point of my work, and I'm glad you kind of picked up on this, is it's almost like I'm an archivist. I mean, half of my book is meant to be read, and half of it is
yeah,
meant to be a reference book. 25 pages of the first book, We Want Them Infected, were nothing but quotes starting in April 2020 of doctors declaring the pandemic over. And the subsequent book is very similar to that,
right,
in that many pages of it are just collections of quotes from articles that they wrote in the mainstream press saying in May 2021, we have herd immunity, or that the Delta variant is nothing to worry about, or the head of our FDA, Marty McCary, calling the Omicron variant Omicold or nature's vaccine. But it's just collections of quotes and quotes and quotes and quotes, because it's the best way to be entirely
right,
fair to people.
right.
And they can't argue against their own words,
No,
though they have tried. They've tried.
they will. But that is so important. I mean, we're big on that around here. Always have been big on making sure that you can read people in their own words, regardless of where they're from. I mean, we cover a lot of white nationalists. I've read a
Yep.
lot of them in the way they phrased it, right? This is the same thing. They're going to get called on it. This is what you said. This is what you said right here. This is exactly how you said it. Can you explain what you were thinking here? Just
Yeah.
And
And
I'm
there's a lot of overlap between those groups, right? I
right.
mean, the people who I discuss were on Tucker Carlson's programs quite a bit. They were interviewed by Charlie Kirk quite a bit.
Hmm.
They were sponsored by a man by the name of Jeffrey Tucker. He was the origin of the Great Barrington Declaration, and he now runs the Brownstone Institute. And he is an overt proud child labor advocate who is also pro-tobacco and has connections, or at least had connections, to neo-Confederate groups. So it's all just a toxic mix of right-wing disinformation. And you mentioned
Yeah.
Walker's name,
Yeah.
Walker
Walker
Bragg.
Bragman wrote the foreword to your book. He's done some amazing reporting on this stuff. Great,
Yeah, no,
great
and
work.
he wrote probably about 40 pages, or I should say, I just stole 40 pages from him, because you're absolutely right. He has done much better work than anyone of trying to reveal the dark money funding these groups. And I sound like a crazy person
No,
myself, but I mean, it really is sort of an international kind of conspiracy to do everything that we're seeing now with our federal public health agencies. It was all planned in advance and paid for.
exactly. And you look at the coordination between the actors. You look at the business that the Trump sons are doing down in Brazil. You look at Hungary. You look at all of these various. I mean, Tucker Carlson getting paid by the Hungarian government to come over and do puff pieces on Orban. You
Yeah.
have all of these things that add up to an international conspiracy, or at least a whole bunch of international bad actors who know each other and work together all the time to do information operations, among other things. And you can call that a conspiracy or not, but at some point, the difference ceases to kind of matter. This is
Yeah,
what's happening.
the same forces that were active here in the United States were active in the UK. They were
Hmm.
very active in Sweden. They were all over the world. So yeah, I sound like someone I would have mocked about 5 years ago, but it's all true, man. It's all true.
In a lot of these cases, it has proved itself to be a lot more true than, we thought it was. And here we are at this point fighting what really feels like an existential kind of battle at this right now.
No, when I look back on my very earliest pandemic writing, so I write a weekly blog for Science-Based Medicine, and my first article there was in May 2021, defending the pediatric COVID vaccine against attack by Vinay Prasad. When I look back on that, it's crazy how naive I was. I thought to myself, if I just present the evidence and data,
Right.
he'll see it my way, everyone will see it my way. But he was playing a different game.
Yeah.
He was playing the game of, how do I manipulate people? How do I, propagandize people into thinking that COVID is no big deal, even if this means letting millions of children contract COVID without a vaccine. And I don't want to make the vaccine like it was totally perfect. It definitely wasn't, even though these guys all overhyped the COVID vaccine 5 years ago or 4 years ago, claiming it blocked transmission anyways.
Right. And that's another
But
one of those persistent things that, like, God, whoever did communications, whoever spread that should have just, no, there's no such thing. It doesn't work that way. But
yeah,
no, it blocks transmission. Because it's not going to do
yeah.
that. And it's not going to do that. And the skeptics are going to look at it and say, look, see, they were wrong. See, they said that.
Yeah, there was a good hope that was going to be the case in the winter of 2021 and the spring of 2021, but the virus was still brand new at that time.
No.
The vaccine was totally brand new. The technology was so brand new. But Jay Bhattacharya said vaccinated people have zero risk of spreading the virus. Same with Vinay Prasad. Same with Marty McCary. And now they say that was just a lie. Not the lie that they told, of course, a lie told by other people. So
How did the lie get
blaming,
spread, Marty? How did the lie get
Yeah.
spread, Marty? Yeah. It's phenomenal to think that we are at that point now where we're doing the revisionist history with them, and wow, here we are. It's one thing to, read about it in history books. It's another thing to see it happening in real life when you're alive. This
Yeah.
is just wow. So,
yeah.
how can people best support your work? Obviously, get the book, but is there anything else people can do to help?
Well, I don't want to make it seem like they need to support my work. If they want to find me, I am on Blue Sky at like 19 Joho. I have a very small podcast myself called We Want Them Infected. The books are available from Amazon, are preferably from Red Hawk Publishing, directly from the publisher. And then I
Absolutely.
write a free column for science-based medicine every week. But I think that they can best support my work by making their own voice known and by trying to speak out themselves when they see false claims and disinformation, especially if there's someone in a position of authority, especially if they're a medical school dean or medical school professor or PhD
Right.
scientist. you
Right.
know People like Peter Hotez and Paul Offit should not be famous, because there should be 1,000 Peter Hotezes. There
Exactly.
should be 1,000 Paul Offits, and I think we're going to see more and more. But they can best support me by by joining me. And I don't want to make it seem like it was just me.
No.
There were many, many, many other voices besides my own speaking out in
No,
many
but you
different
were
ways.
speaking out and you're the one I'm talking to here. So, I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah,
definitely fine to say, hey, I said some stuff when it wasn't necessarily popular and I pissed off some people at
yeah,
the top of this profession, but it was worth it because it was the right thing to say and the right thing to do at the time. And somebody needed to do it. Here I am.
yeah.
I can do this. These,
And had the election gone the other way, I would have been accused. I already was accused of just hysterical fear mongering, when in reality, I vastly
uh-huh.
underestimated the threat, even as I desperately tried to warn people about it.
I had a feeling it was going to be this bad, but like this was the dark place scenario and we're getting there. So, to everybody who's out there just trying to stop it out there, just pushing back, thank you. Team effort. Everybody does what they can, and with any luck, we're going to survive this thing. That's what we're going to try
Yeah.
and do for the next while.
And I appreciate your voice
I
in your podcast too. You
appreciate
do a
yours as
great job
well,
of
Doctor. Thank
connecting
you,
people.
and I really appreciate coming back on with me to commiserate about all of this and talk about how we're keeping records. We're keeping records. We're going to have those names at some point. So thank you again, Doctor. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, my pleasure, Griff. Take care. I'll be back anytime.
All right. Take care.